Hi, I'm Eleanor.
And I'm Sarah.
And we work for Sea Synergy Marine Awareness and Activity Centre based down here in Waterville in County Kerry. Today we want to talk to you a little bit about marine biodiversity. So when we talk about marine biodiversity, we're talking about all of the living things that are in the ocean. We're going to start with some of the things you might find on the seashore, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of the larger animals that you can find off the Irish coast.
Now we're going to go to the beach. This is what you'll need for your trip to the seashore. Always make sure you bring an adult when you go to the beach. Wear suitable shoes like wellies or old trainers that you don't mind getting wet. Be careful if you're walking on a rocky beach because algae or seaweed can make the rocks very slippery. Always check the tides before going rock pooling. The best time to go rock pooling is about half an hour before low tide. Always be gentle when handling marine life and never pick up an animal if you don't know what it is. And as always, take only pictures and leave only footprints behind. Alright, so we're on the beach and I've just lifted up a rock and found some amazing animals underneath. Starting off with this marine snail, a top shell, who's right next to another marine snail, a limpet, and they have very different shells. Ellie will talk more about that later. And then in the middle of the rock, a very, very cool animal, a sea star. This one has actually just lost 2 of its limbs, and you can just see there the tiny nubs where they're starting to grow back. They'll eventually reach full size like the other legs. Down here we have a beadlet anemone, and I'll just touch it gently so you can see how sticky its tentacles are. It uses these tentacles to eat. And then we'll move farther down the rock again, and over here you'll see a little bit of seaweed, some keel worms, which are those white things there, and over here in this little crevice are some baby barnacles. And then we'll move around to the other side of the rock where you'll see one more anemone, except it has its tentacles inside. So they look a little bit more like jelly, and they're very, very smooth to the touch. In this video, Ellie is going to show us the responsible way to pick up and put back a rock when rock pooling. So very gently lift the rock and inspect underneath to see if there are any animals. And then when you are done, place it back very, very gently, exactly where you found it. Sometimes when you're rock pooling, there will be a lot of seaweed, and you can pull that away to expose fish, crabs, or prawns underneath that might be hiding in the seaweed. Here we can see a couple limpets that were underneath the seaweed on the rocks. When you're done looking at the animals, always make sure that you put the seaweed back where you found it. This snail here is a great example of a periwinkle. Periwinkles are gastropods, which are mollusks that have a flattened muscular foot that they use to move around and a head that has stalked eyes, which you can see very well here. This class also includes other snails, whelks, limpets, and even slugs who do not have shells. So now we're back at the tray and we're going to take a look at the animals we found. First, here's a periwinkle, a lot like the one we just saw, and underneath is a little trap door called an operculum that keeps water in and predators out. Over here in the corner, we have a baby common shore crab with incredible color variation. And then over here, on the other side of the tray, we have that starfish that we saw earlier that's got 2 very short little arms where they were maybe pulled off or fell off, and they're in the process of growing back. In tray number 2, we can find another baby common shore crab over here in the corner, kind of blending in with the sand. And then down in the bottom corner, a much larger common shore crab, still a baby though. So we can see just how small she is here if I pick her up. So you can see they're a little bit tricky to pick up. And we always want to be very careful when we're handling small sea creatures. So just very gently, right there, I'm going to pick her up and turn her over. And you can see here she's trying to pinch me. And just under there we can tell if it is a boy or a girl by the shape of the bottom flap of their shell. So here she's got a much wider flap, so we can tell that she's a girl. And here you can see I'm demonstrating a very safe way to hold a crab with your thumb on the top middle of its back and your fingers down underneath. I'm lucky this one though is a baby, so it won't pinch me very hard. And then over here in the corner we have a prawn. So prawns are really interesting. They move very fast. So if I just try to get it to flick away, it'll show you he jumps there. So they'll flick their back tails to escape quickly away from predators. So they shoot backwards very, very fast. They have big flat tails, a lot like lobsters do. You can tell prawns and shrimp apart because prawns will have stripes, a lot like this one does. You can just see them there. And shrimp instead will have spots or freckles. Prawns are also really interesting because they're incredibly good at camouflage. You can see this one is trying very hard to camouflage on the tray, so it's nearly transparent, and it uses that to its advantage to try to blend in with its surroundings. So here we found a beautiful example of sugar kelp. It's nearly 2 meters long, so I'm just going to lay it down so we can see the entire kelp. And underneath here at the very bottom, underneath this tuft of seaweed, we have the holdfast, which is like the roots of seaweed. It holds onto the rocks. We move up to the stipe, which is a lot like the stem, right there in the middle. And then you can see the long fronds that would be waving around in the water. So we just got back from the beach. We found a lot of really cool stuff there. And now Ellie is going to talk about something else that we often find on the beaches all around Ireland.
Yeah, so I often get asked what these things are. And funny enough, one person once asked me if they were dried bats, which was really hilarious, but they're not dried bats. They're actually egg cases. So around Ireland, we have several different species of rays that lay eggs, just like a chicken lays an egg and the baby grows inside and hatches out. This is what a ray egg case looks like. We also have 2 species of shark that lay eggs that commonly wash up in this area. So this little one here is a dogfish egg case, and then this larger one here is from a species of nursehound. Now the difference between the shark cases and the ray cases is really easy to spot when you look closely. So the shark cases have these really curly tendrils at the end, and those are used to wrap around seaweed that helps to hold the egg case in place so it stays nice and safe while the little baby shark grows inside. The ray cases have more spikes. They're called horns, and they have 4, so 1 in each corner. They're more of a rectangular shape. And those are used to sort of anchor them in the sand, again, to keep it nice and safe while the little baby grows inside. There's several different species that lay egg cases, and so the egg cases all look a little bit differently. So this larger one here is from what we call a blonde ray, and then this smaller one here that has much longer horns on this side and very, very short ones here is from a painted ray. And then you have an even smaller one that is from a spotted ray. And if you're really, really lucky, you might find one of these really large ones. Now this size one will be from what we call a white skate. So that's one of our largest species of skate in Ireland. And the egg case is obviously much, much bigger as well. Now this one is quite old. We've had it in our centre and used it for a lot of our outreach for many years, so it's actually quite dried out. When you normally find them on the beach, they're still a bit wet and they're a bit flexible. And that also means that they're much bigger. So these could be about the size of an A4 piece of paper when they're born, which is pretty big.
Okay, so these are some of the shells that we commonly find on the beach here. So this one here is an example of a razor clam. We also have a few nice limpet shells. This guy is a pretty battered looking dog whelk. And then this one is from an otter shell. And this is a species of oyster. My favorite thing actually when we're talking about shells is that you can see growth patterns on them. So if you hold this one really carefully, you can see that it has lots of little lines across it. Just like you'd see the rings in a tree, these can actually tell you how old the shell is. Now, it's not quite as simple as just being able to count the lines because the shell grows at different paces throughout the year. So sometimes there'll be quite a wide band, which might have been summer growth in a really good year where there's lots of food. And then there could be a narrower band, and that might have been when it slowed down growing during winter when there was less food available. You can see these on the razor clam shell as well when you look closely. So razor clams start out as a really tiny shell and build up layers year on year until they grow to adult size. So these are 2 limpet shells. We've got a pretty big one and a pretty small one. Now their shape changes depending on where they live on the shore. So sometimes if they're in a more exposed location, they'll have a slightly different shape to when they're in a sheltered location. What's really lovely about limpets is they actually have a home just like we do. So this little limpet, if this was the rock it was living on, it would sort of shuffle its shell into the rock and it makes a little scar, and we call it a home scar. And then when the tide comes in, the limpet's able to move around the rock and eat algae off the rock surface. Then when the tide starts to go back out, he'll go back to exactly the same spot he was before, and hunker down while the tide's out so that he can stay nice and moist and have lots of water inside his shell and stay safe until the tide comes back in.
Okay, so now that we've covered a lot of the small critters that you might find on the rocky shore, we're going to talk a little bit more about the big animals that you find in the open ocean.
So Ireland is a really amazing place to study marine biodiversity or to even learn a little bit about it. We're really lucky with where we're based in the world. As you can see on the map, I'm just holding it up here and Sarah's going to do a lovely close-up. Ireland has a very large marine territory. It's actually about 10 times the size of the land, which gives us a huge opportunity to explore the marine environment. The Marine Institute do a lot of deep sea research in the area, and it's really worth checking out their website if it's something that you're interested in. There's a lot of projects and studies that they carry out, and they have lots of lovely videos and interactive stuff to do as well. So here's the real map of Ireland. So you can see the red outline is outlining Ireland's marine territory. And Ireland's marine territory is approximately 10 times the size of the land of Ireland. It's one of the largest in Europe, and we're really lucky being based out on the northwestern edge of Europe because we get a lot of very interesting species that have migratory routes that pass our coastline, and we have a lot of interesting features on our seabed as well. So in Ireland, we have approximately 24 different species of whales and dolphins. The Irish Whale and Dolphin Group are an amazing resource. They have a lot of information. You can check out their website. It's iwdg.ie. And they've created this lovely chart that gives you some of the most common species. And we're going to talk a little bit more about some of these today. On the back of the chart, if you're ever out on a boat and happen to see a whale or dolphin, it has some really useful information about how the whales or dolphins enter and exit the water, so what you'll see first from the boat. And that really helps with identifying what species you might be looking at. When we talk about the different species of whales and dolphins, we talk about them in terms of how they feed. So there's two different common feeding mechanisms. We have toothed whales and we have baleen whales. So the larger ones are generally baleen whales, and then some of our smaller dolphins like the porpoise, the common dolphin, and the killer whale, those are all toothed whales. And Sarah's going to talk a little bit more about how they feed now.
Yeah. So, just to give you some examples of what we have on this table. So, right here, this big piece in the middle is baleen, but it's just one piece of baleen. So, a baleen whale would have hundreds of these in its mouth, and they only hang from the top of its jaw. So, it's like having a giant comb in your mouth, but only if you had it for your top set of teeth. And it hangs down, and there are all of these tiny hair fibers, nearly. It is actually exactly like hair because it's made out of keratin, which is what your hair and nails are made out of. And so if you tap on it, it sounds a lot like nails, and it feels a lot like a very, very strong nail. And so these fibers that hang down off of the baleen plate are used to catch tiny, tiny animals called plankton that the whales will filter out of the water, and they eat, I'd say, like thousands of pounds of plankton every day. So it's great to see one of the biggest animals in the world eats one of the smallest animals in the world. So they are constantly feeding on these tiny, tiny little plankton that are nearly invisible to the naked eye. You have to look at them under a microscope. And then, to give you a good example of a toothed whale, we have this jawbone here, which I believe is from a bottlenose dolphin, and it actually still has most of its teeth in it. So when we find these bones on the seashore, a lot of times what we'll find is a bone just like that one. So you just have the bottom jaw, and there are no teeth in it. And you can just see the little grooves where the teeth came out, but this one actually still has most of its teeth in. So you can see it's like having an entire mouth full of canines, nearly. They're all super, super sharp teeth. And so the dolphins or whales will use these to eat fish, or even some of the larger species of toothed whales, like orcas, as Ellie mentioned earlier, will catch other whales or penguins, seals, any large, they eat like large mammals, and they eat fish as well. Salmon are one of the main parts of an orca whale's diet most of the time. So there's that example there, if you can see most of those very, very sharp teeth.
So I'm going to talk a little bit now about how whales and dolphins breathe underwater. So they are mammals, so just like us, they have lungs. So they breathe air, which means they have to come up to the surface to breathe. To make that easier for them, they evolved to have their nose basically coming out the top of their head, which for us would look really stupid, but for a whale or dolphin, it works really well. So this is an example of a common dolphin skull. And you can see at the top here, if you look really closely, there's two little holes, and those are basically its nose coming out the top of its head. So as it swims up out of the water, it'll pop its head up first, and then it's able to breathe very easily in and out. This is an example of a pilot whale skull that Sarah's very carefully holding up for me there, thank you. And you can see, obviously, you can see the holes much bigger here because this is a much larger animal. So a pilot whale, I think, is up to about 11 to 12 meters long, whereas a common dolphin only grows to just over 2 meters. So quite a smaller animal in comparison. You can obviously see underneath here, this would have been its top jaw, so its teeth and its mouth would have been in here. As Sarah was talking about earlier, it's a toothed whale.
So as Ellie was mentioning earlier, we have 25 different species of whales and dolphins in Ireland. And the smallest species is only just under 2 meters long. So that would be the harbor porpoise. They're very, very small. But then on the other end of the scale, we have fin whales, which are the second largest whale in the world, and they can grow up to 22 meters long. So if you remember from earlier when we were measuring out whales on the beach, we measured 12 meters first, which would have been the humpback whale. Here, the fluke. So humpback whales actually have this very characteristic fluke that no other whale species have, and they have this beautiful white pattern on the back of their tail that is actually a lot like a thumbprint for us, or a fingerprint in general. So each pattern on the back of a humpback whale's fluke will be different depending on the different individual. And then the second whale we measured out was a fin whale. That one, like I said earlier, was 22 meters. So here we have an example of a fin whale bone. So I don't know if any of you can guess what this might be. We have a lot of these in our body as well. This is the rib bone from a fin whale. So this is just half the width of a fin whale. And this end over near me is where it would have connected to the fin whale's spine. And then the other end over on Ellie's side is where it would have connected to the fin whale's sternum. So we are missing quite a big chunk of this even.
About 2 foot.
About 2
It
feet.
would be bigger.
Mm-hmm. So this is a very, very big bone from a very, very big whale. And we have a lot of these in Irish waters. So if you go out on the boat in the summer, or if you go do a headland survey, if you live near the coast, sometimes you can see fin whales surfacing. All right, now, so to finish off, we are going to do a paper plate craft that you can do at home. So for this craft, you'll need paper plates, you'll need a toilet paper roll or white paper, and you'll need a pen, scissors, and either tape or glue. And then you'll also need whatever you want to use to decorate your whale. So to start off, you're going to take your paper plate and you're going to fold it in half like this. And then once you've folded it in half, you're going to take one edge of the paper plate and you're going to fold it back on itself. So it should look a little bit like this. So it doesn't line up perfectly, but it's just got a little bit of a slant right there. And then you're going to open your paper plate back up and you're going to push that down towards the center and fold it back in on itself. So now you have the front of the whale right here, which is the flat side.
I'm making a mess, but it's fine. It worked. That's a little hard to get straight, so take your time.
Mm-hmm. For sure, take your time. There he is. Perfect. So now that we've got the front of our whale, we're going to work on his tail. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your pen or your Sharpie or any marker, and you're going to trace from about 1 centimeter in on the tail. You're going to trace half of a tail shape, and then we're going to trace up from the tail and give the whale a back. So it should look something like this. So you'll see right here is the tail, And then here is that little piece we're going to cut out to have the back of the whale. So, perfect. I'm going to borrow the scissors, and here you want to make sure you're only cutting out the shape that looks a little bit like a V. So, we're going to cut right along that line, and then right along the other line. There. We're going to do that. So right now, we've got a little bit of a diamond when we open him back up. And then what we're going to do is we're going to cut along the other bold line right there, but making sure not to cut it off at the top. So you want to leave a little bit so that your tail doesn't get disconnected. Oops. So we're going to cut just along there and keep maybe about a centimeter off from cutting the tail all the way off. So you want it just to come a little bit loose like that. So now when you open your whale up, you should be able to push the tail out just like that and fold your whale back over, being very careful when you push the tail. It might rip a little bit, that's okay. You can also use the scissors.
Mine just ripped a little bit.
You can use the scissors and cut it a little bit closer. Just be careful not to cut it all the way off. There we go. So then you want to fold it over, perfect, just like that. And he's got a little tail right there. So now that we have our tail, we're going to make a little blowhole for the whale. So you're just going to take your scissors and you're going to right in the middle, so in the middle of the very top of the whale heel, you're going to make a tiny notch right there. So we're just going to cut down a little bit like that. And you might need to adjust this too when you're adding the spout later, this little bit right here. You might need to make it a little bit bigger. So it should look like this, and you have a little space right there in the top. And then finally, the last thing we're going to do with our scissors is we're going to make a little smile for our whale. So pick whichever side you want to be the front. You can also decorate both sides if you want to. And you're just going to draw a little smile on your whale. Give him a little grin, because he's a very happy whale. And then we're going to take the scissors and just cut maybe about a centimeter in and another little notch right underneath. So he's got a nice big whaley grin, just like that. And then we'll take those pieces.
I give my whale much bigger teeth.
And we'll put him right over there. So he's a very happy whale. Perfect. And the next thing we're going to do is work on the water spout coming out of the top of your whale. So you're going to take a toilet paper roll like this one, and you can cut it right in half. These ones are a little bit thick, so I might have to cut out more of it. There we go. So I'm going to cut this in half again.
Lengthwise. Not like half this way, half like
yes,
this
half long ways, because we want him to have a very tall water spout. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take this and we're going to cut down thin strips. So, cut down like that. And you can adjust this any way you want. And if you don't have any spare toilet paper rolls lying around, like I said earlier, you can also just use a piece of white paper or any pieces of scrap paper lying around, and you can make a spout out of really anything. So I'm going to cut this down even just a little bit more because it's very stiff. There we go. There you are. And then what we're going to do now is we're going to fold it in on itself. So you're just going to roll it right up like that. And if you want to decorate this too before you cut it, or even after you cut it, you can always paint this. So you can paint it blue like the water. You can paint it white like sea spray. You can paint it any color you want. And then you're going to just go and stick it right in that little groove we made earlier. And I'm just going to give my guy a little face here. Got a big smile. And an eyeball. There we go. There we go. Perfect. There we are. And now you have your whale, and you can decorate it however you want. if you get to decorating and your tail is a little bit loose, like mine is, what you can do to secure it is you can take a piece of sellotape and you can tape just on the inside the whale tail to the back of the whale. Or you can take a little bit of glue and just drop it on the inside of either side of the tail and then pinch it down. But make sure that you leave it enough time to dry, and then the whale should be nice and secure. I think this one is a good example of that. He's got a little bit of glue in there just to hold his tail on nice and tight. And then you can bring it out and flatten it so that you have a nice flat fluke right there. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you learned something new. We had a lot of fun making this video today, so we hope you enjoyed it. If you're interested in learning more about what Sea Synergy does, you can check us out at seasynergy.org, and we hope to see you in Cary soon.